Hi, welcome to the online course on ASP.NET Virtual Lab. In this video, we'll see how to use ADO.NET in our software. So ADO.NET is basically used to connect to the backend, that is the databases that we use to store our data from the front end. So ADO.NET can be used with a variety of databases that helps us to attach our front end with any type of backend, that is the database. So before we start, we'll see what ADO.NET is, how ADO.NET can be used in connecting to the databases. ADO.NET is a bridging tool that helps us to create dynamic pages and allow us to read and write data into the database from the front end. So the front end can be anything. It can be a web page or it can be a Windows form. It provides us a set of classes and libraries that come with the Microsoft .NET framework. So ADO.NET is a part of Microsoft .NET framework that provides us various features to get connected to the databases. It encapsulates all the data access operation, that is all the operations that we do with the databases, like inserting, deleting, updating records and querying the records. All these operations are encapsulated in these classes and libraries that come with ADO.NET. ADO stands for ActiveX Data Object. So it facilitates data access using the same technology. So using the same technology, we can access data from various databases that are available for use. So the databases like Oracle, SQL Server, MS Access. So these are the databases. Not only these, then the ADO.NET also supports various databases that are available apart from this, MySQL also. So how the data is accessed with ADO.NET? So ADO.NET sits in between the database, that is the data store, and the Windows Forms or the web forms. So Windows Forms is basically the Windows applications, web form is the web application. So you can connect any database or any data store with the help of ADO.NET to any front end. So you can have the same database connected to the Windows application as well as the web application. So your application can be executed standalone on Windows as well as web application can be available on the web. So you need not have different databases for the Windows application and the web application. So your ADO.NET is capable of linking the database, that is the data store, to both the applications. Now to access the database, we use the connection. So there are two connection models that we come across when we access the database. The connected model. So in the connected model, the database is always connected to the database. So whether you are updating some record, or fetching some records from the database, or you're updating some records, the connection is always there with the front end. So the front end objects get connected to the database and remain connected with the database throughout the operations. The second model we use is disconnected model. So in disconnected model, these objects get data from the databases and store it in the objects like arrays. Not exactly an array, but in the form like array. So these data objects fetch the information and store the information within it, and all the operations can be done with these objects, like updating, deleting, inserting the values. So all these things can be done on these data objects, and finally the data objects can be updated into the database. So all the values can be submitted to the database. So in the disconnected model, the front end is not connected to the back end continuously. So as a result, the resources are utilized very less, whereas in the connected model, the resources are more utilized, as the connected model occupies the space in the memory to read the objects and save the objects. So the continuous connection has to be maintained in the connected model, whereas in disconnected model, once the records are collected into the objects, the data objects, the connection is removed, and the connection is again maintained whenever the data is to be updated into the database. Now, how do we access the database using ADO.NET? So there are few steps that we follow to access the database using ADO.NET. So first you need to create a database connection. So you need to know what database you are using and how to create a connection between the database and the front end. Then you open the database connection. Then we create something called as a record set. So if you are fetching records from the database, you need to create a record set. The record set is capable of holding records in it. So it is an object basically. So the record set holds the data into these objects and helps us to deal with this data. Then once the record set object is created, you extract the records from this record set and use whatever it is to be used for. Then close the record set. Once the data reading is done, close the object and finally close the connection. So this is how we access the database in these steps. So using these steps you can access the database, you can get connected to the database, access the database, and again close the connection with the database. Now what are the objects that we use for getting connected to the database? So we need a connection object that helps us to create a connection between our front end and the back end. Then we also need a data provider. Now data provider is the object that tells us which database you are using, where the database is stored, what type of database we are using. Then we require certain commands to work with the database. So we usually work with the database by firing certain SQL queries. So these command object execute the SQL queries and provide the results in the form of data reader. So if you are using if you are firing a select query, the select query will fetch the records from database and store or keep the collection in the data store object, data reader object. Now data reader object reads data from the data store and the connection is maintained continuously, hence it is called, and hence it is in the connected model, hence it is the connected model. So in the connected model, the database is continuously connected with the front end, whereas in the disconnected model we use something called as data adapter. Now data adapter is again the object that helps us to execute different commands like select, insert, delete, and update. Now here these are the bulk commands that can be done that can execute or that can be stored later. So this works in the disconnected model. So the data adapter fills the records into the data set. Now data set is the collection of the data table. Now under the data table collection we have data table, the rows, columns, and the constraints associated with the tables that we create. Now these data table have also the relation. So there are different types of relations within the tables. So if you want to fetch records from these related tables, so we require a data relation collection object. So data relation collection objects helps us fetch records from multiple tables together. So if we have foreign key and primary key, so we use data relation collection. So the entire thing works as a disconnected model. So the data adapter fetches data from the data store and stores it into the data set. Now data set is basically the collection of table, rows, columns, and the constraints. It also has the data relation collection. So data relation collection object is capable of fetching data from the related tables. So this is what is our ADO.NET objects that we require, and the models, the connected and disconnected model. So we require data provider to get connected to the databases. So first we'll see the objects that are associated with the data connection or the ADO.NET. The object connection is used to establish the connection with the database. Command, this object executes individual SQL queries or the commands that we require to access the database. Then the data reader. Data reader object reads data from the database. So the data reader is capable of reading the records in only one direction, that is the forward direction. Then the data adapter. The data adapter is basically the link between the command and the database. So it connects the command with the data set. So the commands execute and the data set is filled with the result, that is the data fired through this command or accessed through this command. The data providers that we use is so we have different providers for different databases. So if you are using Oracle, ODBC, OLDB or SQL Server, so these provider names are basically nothing. These providers are nothing but the namespaces that we use for getting connected to those databases. So if you see SQL Server, we use the namespace system.data.sql client. For OLDB, so we use the namespace as system.data.oldb. Now these namespaces are basically like packages in Java. So namespaces are providers different classes and libraries to access data or deal with the data in the database. So for every type of database we have the provider. So for Oracle we have system.data.oracle client. For ODBC we have system.data.odbc. So these providers provide the database of that type. These providers help us to create objects like connection, command, data reader and data adapter. Now if you see here on the screen, so for every type of database the object is prefixed with that database, with the database name. So for SQL, if you are dealing with the SQL server, so the database name is prefixed, or the object name is prefixed by SQL connection. For command it is SQL command. For data reader is SQL data reader. Data adapter SQL data adapter. Similarly for ODBC and OLDB and Oracle. So all these objects are prefixed with the database name. So this is what is the required theory to work with the ADO.NET. I hope you have enjoyed the video, and we'll see the practical implementation of these of the ADO.NET in further videos. Thank you.